Thanks for returning from the great food outside. It's always a test. I'm Brian Kahn. My job today is to moderate this panel on addressing legal challenges. It's especially important, I think, at this fork in the road for collaboratives for a series of reasons. First, I'm told 30 to 40,000 acres is tied up in Region 1 in terms of lands that are due for stewardship and are held up because of litigation. Second, I'm challenged by new glasses and the shaky handwriting due to Parkinson's, trying to read my own notes. Appeals, in my experience, and I've facilitated a fair number of collaboratives, undermine the energy and enthusiasm that is required for those processes to go forward. So has a direct negative impact on what we've been talking about today. Third, in the aftermath of the fires, litigation by some quote, end quote, environmental groups or individuals, was probably more to the point, antagonizes a broad spectrum of the people in this state and further polarizes the community. It's inflammatory, and I didn't mean the pun. It is politically inflammatory. And it causes them, in my personal experience, to paint people with a broad stereotypical brush. I'd say 8 out of 10 people I talk to don't know that major elements of the environmental community are core participants in the collaborative process. The label environmentalist is applied across the board, and so people are stereotyped with utter good faith by the believer who doesn't understand the facts. And as we've talked about in the earlier panel, talking about emotion that plays a very strong part in people's forming their opinions. That polarized situation is fertile ground for demagoguery. People who play on the labels on both sides, oversimplifying and distorting for their own reasons, and they manipulate public opinion. We cannot afford that as a state or a nation. So today we have a diverse and experienced panel to address the issue of legal challenges. We're going to begin with Megan Brazel, National Forest Campaign Manager for the Wilderness Society. She leads their National Forest Campaign that is nationwide, as well as their forest campaign in Washington and Oregon. And I would ask each of the panelists, before they come up, starting with Megan, to tell us a little bit of personal background. Where'd you grow up, what your folks do? If you could speak into the mic, that would be great, just so people can hear you. I know he said leave that one home, use the big one. I think that's the one he's got there, his recording is.
Does this work? No, there we go.
That's on there.
So I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my dad is an entrepreneur. He sells airplane tires, so kind of the self-made man, and spent a lot of time going to the mountains in Colorado when I was a kid. That's where I fell in love with mountains, and that's how I ended up in Missoula for school.
Thank you. Would you like to make your remarks? We'll do it one at a time.
Great. So, as Brian mentioned, I am the National Forest Campaign Manager for the Wilderness Society, and I'm currently based in Seattle, but kind of cut my teeth on these issues here in Montana, so it's great to be back in Missoula and see a lot of familiar faces. And it's really exciting to see new faces that I don't know, because that means that this collaborative work is growing and expanding. I worked on the Lolo and Lincoln Restoration Committee. I helped develop the Southwestern Crown Collaborative, and I've worked with a lot of you in this room, so it's great to see you all. The Wilderness Society, our mission is to protect wilderness and inspire Americans to care for wild places. And as part of that, we see the working forest as a significant part of our mission. We do focus on protecting wilderness and new designation where we think it's appropriate, but we're also really interested in how the lands that surround wilderness areas are managed. And one of our founders, Howard Zahniser, who was the principal author of the Wilderness Act, I like this quote that he used that says, "Those who would have a sound wilderness preservation program must be cooperative with those who are working for sustained yields in our forests devoted to production." So going back to our founding back in the 30s, we have recognized the role that working forests play in the overall landscape. So as part of my work in Montana on collaborative efforts and on the Lolo Restoration Committee, I was involved in the Colt Summit Restoration Project up on the Sealy District. I'm seeing heads nodding. I feel like that project is kind of infamous these days. But just some brief background, it was collaboratively developed by the Lolo Restoration Committee. It was a very balanced project. It provided timber to the mill. It also protected and restored critical bull trout habitat, and also provided some security habitat for grizzly and lynx. And from our perspective as the Wilderness Society, it was integrally linked to what was then Senator Tester's Forest Jobs and Recreation Act, what is now the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act. And it's kind of part of the, there are three legs to that stool, and that was the active restoration piece that we were very invested in. So Matt can talk more about this, but there was, as you all know, a lawsuit filed against that project by the Alliance for the Wild Rockies and a couple of other groups in September of 2011. And so we worked with a whole host of environmental and non-environmental groups on a Friend of the Court brief supporting the Forest Service in that decision. So I'll let Matt talk a little more about that. But thinking about lessons learned through Colt Summit, I think one of the things that was really stuck out to me was collaboration is great, and it really helps to strengthen these projects, but you also still have to make sure that you are following the science and following the law, because when these groups come out and challenge projects, they're not challenging it, at least in their claims, because it's collaborative. They're challenging it because they see a weakness in part of it. So, for example, on Colt Summit, they saw that it was in critical lynx habitat, and so that was largely what they sued on. But we had the science on our side, and we had the foremost lynx biologists in the region, even in the country, and we had maps that showed us literally where the lynx were, the radio collared. And when you overlaid that map with the project map, you saw that all the places that lynx were using were not slated for active management. It was, the units were all around that. So that was one of the strengths of the project that we were able to speak to. I would say emphasize not only, when you're talking about a project, if it does get challenged, don't just emphasize the collaborative nature, but also emphasize that it is the right thing to do from a scientific perspective and from a legal perspective, because that, I think, will just really bolster your case. Ensure, obviously, that you truly have diverse support and participation. I know that Montana, I think of as kind of the birthplace of collaboration, and I know that you guys do a really great job of it. In some other places that I've seen, there are collaboratives that are collaborative in name only. And so I think it's really important to have that true diverse participation. And then Brian was mentioning this in the final comment of the last panel, but communication is key. I mean, it's true. I'm learning all about the digital communication world, which is totally foreign to me, and it's really important. And so you need to be communicating, getting your message out, talking about the project, how it was developed, who's involved, the scientific strengths of it, in order for that to be understood on a broader level. And so that means going to the editorial board and the Missoulian. It means posting on Facebook, Twitter. It means pretty pictures on Instagram. All of that stuff seems like fluff, but increasingly it's very important and will help people to understand your project, which means that when, if it does get challenged, there will be, just more awareness of what you guys are doing, which will make it easier for you guys to be supported by the broader community going forward. And then I guess the last thing I would say is which I'm sure the lawyers to my left and right can attest to, is document, document, document. So when you are, I mean, a lot of what's great about collaboration is the organic nature of it, and you're sitting around a table and you're talking, you're not sitting behind a keyboard writing, comments on an EIS or an EA, and that's great, but you still need to document through, I saw it in some of the materials, meeting notes for collaboratives, that sort of thing, document your engagement with the Forest Service, because that is all something that can and will be used in the project record for that project if it does get challenged, and it also enables you to push back on these claims that, oh, you're not a real collaborative, this wasn't really a collaboratively developed project, and if all you have are the conversations that took place around kitchen tables and conference room tables at district offices, those aren't, they're public meetings, but they're not like televised, right? So a lot of people don't know about those conversations that happen, and so you need to document it in order to diffuse and push back on claims that you weren't really engaged in the development of the project. So with that, I will leave it there.
Thank you, Lee, and I want to also congratulate you on your courage and willingness to sit between two lawyers. First one to speak will be Clifford. He's worked in various aspects of public lands and natural resource throughout his career. After graduating from the University of Montana School of Law in '95, he had a very interesting experience for clerking for federal district judge Don Malloy, who authored many opinions we all know on forest stewardship, forest management issues. And we talked together about the experience of being a law school graduate, writing your notes about what you think, and hearing them come out of the mouth of a federal judge. It's quite an experience. Where'd you go? What's your posted, man?
So where, is this on? Yeah, there you go. Well, I grew up in several places. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, where I tromped around the Tonto National Forest, Apache Sitgreaves National Forest with my dad, hunting quail and various other things. And then a little bit later, I moved, for junior high up to northern Minnesota, where I tromped around the Superior National Forest, chasing grouse as a kid, and having a good time generally. And then central Minnesota as well, farm country, couldn't stand it, never went back. And my dad was a water rights lawyer, which I now am as well.
Why did you decide to go into law?
Why did I decide to go into law? Not for the usual reason people in my generation did, was they couldn't think anything else to do. It was more because I was really interested in government and really interested in, kind of how decisions got made, and really wanted to have an influence. And I just kind of had that analytical bent to it, and I felt like I'd be really good at it, and really wanted to know more about how government worked, frankly.
One more quick question, or maybe a quick question and a quick answer. Has it been satisfying, or has it been what you expected, or somehow different?
It has been very satisfying, the greatest decision I ever made. My dad tried to talk me out of it. He's like, don't be a lawyer, don't do that. I think he just didn't want it to be his fault. But thank God I didn't listen to him, because, I felt that I really liked it.
Thank you.
So anyway, I'll just start off here. I'll just say thanks for the invite. I'm sadly living as an expat in California right now, but I'm from here. And I always like a reason to come back, and I don't get to talk about public land law issues much these days either, and I always like doing that. So it's really good to be here, especially in the fall. I've been asked to provide an overview today of kind of different options, a couple different options for collaboratives to get involved in challenges to collaborative projects, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to start with a little bit more background information, personal stuff on me, and probably pontificate a bit here. And I promise not to take up all the time, because I really do want to get to questions. But I got involved in this project back in 2011, I guess it was, when the litigation was filed challenging the Gold Summit project. And I have to say that I was in private practice at the time doing different natural resource law, but I was really drawn to this project. And the reason for that is that, when I came out of law school in '95 here, I wanted to do good things and wanted to do environmental law. And what I quickly realized was that most environmental litigation is cast in this framework of the government is trying to do some bad thing, and our job is to stop them. And 90+% of that, of the things going on were of that nature. And I did a lot of that kind of thing early in my career. There'd be a mine challenge, a mine proposed somewhere, we would challenge the permits for it. There'd be a timber sale, we would challenge that. There would be, various things. I worked with Montana Village Association to challenge a travel plan to Flathead National Forest. things like that. And, I'll just be real clear. I think we did that, and sometimes bad things do happen, and we do stop them. I think we did a lot of good work that way. I think, we got some good results. But ultimately, that's an unsatisfying way, I think, for me anyway, as an environmentalist. I didn't want to spend my whole career that way. And I found myself, as staff counsel for the Clark Fork Coalition here in Missoula, coming across increasingly a lot of agency decisions that we actually thought were pretty good and wanted to defend. We had Superfund cleanups up and down the Clark Fork River we liked. We had, I worked on nutrient rules for the Clark Fork River along with industry, stone container, and town, city, Deer Lodge, et cetera. And so we got, working collaboratively, good results. And we'd find a lot of times somebody wanted to come out of the woodwork and challenge those. The Flathead litigation was like that. We actually got a very collaborative decision on the Flathead Forest Plan, and they're getting challenged from the. And so I really, it kind of forced me to look at things in a different frame. And now, rather than just looking at a cold record and saying, how can I sit at my computer and type comments and think, how did someone really screw this up, and how can I say that they made a bad decision? Find myself where I have to think about, well, what constitutes a good decision? How much analysis is enough? What are the laws that say that this is actually good? And defending that is a whole different mind frame. And I felt who wants to move the ball? Play defense their whole life. Who wants? At some point you want to move the ball forward, and it forces you to think about things a bit differently. So this case seemed that way to me. I was being asked to represent an extraordinarily broad coalition of folks, 32 amicus I've counted here, everybody from the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation all the way, to the Wilderness Society, to the Montana Logging Association and local governments. So that really appealed to me as a way to, the kind of thing I wanted to work more on. And so the first thing we did, I was initially contacted by the Wilderness Society to come into the case, and the first thing we did, looking at that broad group of folks, is like, well, how can we participate? And there were two main alternatives that we discussed. One was to intervene in the case formally, and the other was to file an amicus brief. And I'll talk about legally what each of those two things mean. Ultimately, we decided on the amicus brief route. But so those are kind of the two main avenues. As an amicus, amicus curiae, literally Latin, friend of the court, you can come, you basically, your clients file a brief and get permission of the court to step in and file a brief commenting on legal issues in the case. It's traditionally been used more in appellate litigation, traditionally to make arguments on points of law, but increasingly common in the district courts now. And basically, that's pretty much it. You file a brief, you state your perspective. The theory being that you've got some perspective that the existing parties in the case might not have, and you can come to the court and help the court get facts and legal arguments that will help it reach a rational decision. That's the theory behind being an amicus. And so it's a relatively limited participation. And then once you file that brief, the court is pretty much free to adopt your arguments or not. I mean, that's what they can look at, but you don't really have any status as a party. The second route and the heavier lift is to actually intervene in the case, which actually makes you a party to the case. And so in the case of like the Colt Summit sale, where we want to defend the government, the Colt Summit project, you would be intervening as a defendant, which doesn't sound fun. Who wants to intervene in a lawsuit as a defendant? But that's how you defend the government's decision. And when you do that, you're an actual party to the case. I mean, you get to sit at the table for every motion, every stage of that case. You get to file a brief on all the procedural things. If you don't have to agree, if you don't agree with one of the other parties, you can take a different position. And if you don't like the decision in district court, you can appeal that. And so you really have a much more, you have more status, and you have much more, you're full party at the table. You have much more involvement in the case. So those are the two basic options that you have. Now, let's talk a bit strengths and weaknesses of each. As an amicus, and this is why I think ultimately we did this in the Colt Summit case, it's just a much easier lift. You have much less status as an amicus. But on the other hand, it's much cheaper, less time intensive, And I think more to the point, it's like you don't, if you've got a very, very broad group of folks with different interests, it's just easier mechanically because you don't have, if you're intervening in the case, there's a lot of decisions to be made all throughout the case. Every time there's a motion coming along, you got to agree, you're going to file a brief, everyone has to sign off on it. The legal positions you might want to take. You know, all of you, when you've got a broad coalition coming together from different backgrounds, there's lots of other things going on out there you don't necessarily agree on, and I have to tell this group that. And so the positions you want to take in that litigation, it can be really hard to come up with common ground where the Wilderness Society is willing to take the same kind of legal position as the Montana Forest Products Association. And so that it's hard enough when you have, for example, a coalition of environmental groups intervening in a case to come to agreement on what position to take. I think it would be even much harder the broader you make a coalition. So that's a real downside. Upside to intervention is that, well, typically it's done, for example, in an uncertain political climate where an administration might change and the government can come along and reach a settlement with the plaintiffs that you might not like. Well, if you've intervened in the case, you're a party, the government might settle that, but you can go ahead and take that up. And so that's an advantage there. General considerations, I mentioned the obvious one, which is that in a if you really have a broad group that doesn't agree on a lot of things, then amicus is a much easier lift to get agreement. The downside of that, and this really came up in the Colt Summit litigation, is that our participation in that case, we didn't do a whole lot. We didn't say, I was reading the brief this morning, reviewing the briefs for this. We didn't make a whole lot of comment on the actual legal issues in the case. I think it was largely an opportunity to show the flag, as we say, to the judge and say, look, here's 32 really diverse, different kinds of plaintiffs, and they all have gotten together and they all support this sale. There must be something good about it. You want the court to understand that this didn't pop out of the woodwork one day. And a lot of people worked hard on this, and a lot of different people think it's a good idea for the same reasons, and it's a strong thing. So an amicus brief allows you to do that. The downside is I had conversations with different plaintiffs. There were some legal issues. There were some positions that could have been taken on legal issues in the case that would have maybe been going on a limb a bit for some folks, but really could have said something, if that broad coalition was getting behind it. Again, thinking about moving the ball forward. And it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. It's a lot of work. But I think that it would have a lot more weight for future collaborations if folks were able to come together and say, here's what we think public land what substantive issues ought to look like under NIFMA, what they ought to look like under ESA. Here's what is a good analysis. And the more consensus we can get in those issues and actually state more legal positions in court, I think the more influence these processes would have in the future. So, I'll leave it with that, is that I think it was a really great experience. I'm glad the litigation came out the way it did. I wish it hadn't taken so long, but I think in the future there's really, if folks can do the hard work and the collaboration, I think there's some really fertile ground to have more of that influence folks were talking about earlier today in the legal system.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Lawson Fite, General Counsel for the American Forest Resource Council. He directs AFRC's legal program, helping member companies obtain their goal of consistent and sustainable timber harvest for public forests. He's also worked with numerous collaborators. He has a distinguished academic career, being an undergraduate of Harvard and a graduate of Harvard Law School. Lawson, where'd you grow up? What'd your folks do?
So I grew up kind of around the country. My dad was an Air Force officer. We were stationed a number of places. Then we moved to Vancouver, Washington when I was 10, and I consider that my hometown in the Portland area. My dad then was an airline pilot for 16 years for United and Horizon, and then taught economics because, of course. And my mom mostly worked as a teacher. I do have an interesting family history in that my great-grandfather and his brother owned a sawmill in Rainier, Washington, which is just to the southeast of Olympia. It burned down in, I think, 27, and then they bought another one in Yelm. And that went under with the Depression, but I have some photos of that. I think that that's almost as good a credential for the work I do as those degrees.
Just wonder what led to your interest in law in general and environmental policy in particular.
I've always had an interest in environmental policy, just from a young age, and learning about the world. The legal aspect of it, I enjoy the law because of the intellectual challenge, that there's always a kind of a puzzle to figure out, and that intellectual jousting I really enjoy, and arguments. So being able to put those two together has been very positive.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to speak a little bit about how collaboration can improve outcomes through the legal system. We've heard a little bit about legal challenges, and so that'll be the focus of my remarks. Just to give you a little more perspective on what I do and how it relates to collaboration. AFRC, we're a regional trade association, so we work with companies throughout the West to ensure public harvest, and we partner with organizations such as Montana Wood, basically we have a legal program where we will intervene on behalf of member companies, and we do that in federal court. We also bring our own plaintiff side litigation on occasion, in recent years, as collaboration has been leading to really good project outcomes, we have gotten more involved in representing collaboratives where our members are involved in the collaborative. So, in particular, Kootenai Forest Stakeholders Coalition in Lincoln County, I've represented our member Idaho Forest Group is part of KFSC, and represented them in Lincoln County, both in the district court and at the appellate court level. Have also represented the Clearwater Basin Collaborative on the Nez Clear in Idaho, the Panhandle Forest Coalition, the Payette Forest Coalition in Southwest Idaho, and the Northeast Washington Forestry Coalition, that's on the Colville in Washington. And just last week filed some briefs on behalf of the Boise Forest Coalition in southern Idaho. So, this is really something that's happened over the last few years, where we in industry are getting involved and representing collaboratives as part of our contribution to the collaborative process, the defending the outcome and putting our money wherever our mouth is. We have 2 full-time staff lawyers at AFRC, and we can hire outside counsel as well. And we think it's had an impact. I'm going to start with a little summary of where we are with litigation, and then I'll talk about how collaboration has worked in relation to that. Litigation is a significant issue for forest management. I think that's particularly acute in Region 1. As Brian mentioned, we have 30,000 to 40,000 acres that are under some sort of litigation. And that's, Region 1 has more projects litigated than any other region. I saw a presentation where basically the ratio of projects that get litigated in Region 1 is twice as much as the next highest region, which is, I think, Region 6. And is probably, if you combine all the regions, Region 1 is higher than all the others combined. The current litigation volume affects projects that would produce, at least at last figures, close to 300 million board feet of timber. And with the Cottonwood decision that came out in 2015, there have been kind of cascading injunctions as a result of that. We have 150 million board foot of timber under an injunction, and 50 million of that is already under contract. So, you can see from the industry perspective how that affects things. And we just have, we have right now, pursuant to Cottonwood, the region is consulting on its region-wide links amendment. But of course, when they finish that, they're going to get more litigation. So I would amend Ben Franklin's statement. There are 3 things that are certain. They are death, taxes, and litigation. And we saw a kind of a frustrating experience for a lot of people on the landscape with the Stonewall project, where it took 6 years to get an EIS done. Then the court issued an injunction based on Cottonwood, and then the area caught fire. And I think that was kind of a poster child for how litigation can be problematic. But collaborative projects can improve the outcomes in litigation. And one of the reasons, and I think this kind of ties back to what folks have been saying, is a collaborative project is often a better project. You know, not just it has more support, but when you bring in perspective from folks who want to improve fish passage, or say, who have expertise on links, they can produce a project that simply does a better job of treating the landscape. That's the type of synergy we've been talking about. And I think from an industry side, we maybe have not appreciated that as much in the past as we should have, but working through collaboration, at least for me, that has opened a lot of eyes for me to see how you can get a better project through collaboration. A couple of specific examples there. For example, in the East Reservoir project with the Kootenai Forest stakeholders, there was a lot of input given to the Forest Service on how to deal with lynx effects. And I think the stakeholders identified some areas that should not be treated, that they had a little better handle on the landscape, and were able to flag that for the Forest Service and basically make the project better. Another project is a tower fire recovery project on the Panhandle. In working with collaboration, we're able to reach an agreement to deal with old growth stands, where there was a number of old growth stands had burned, and everyone reached an agreement to not treat the areas that were still old growth. Some of the stands had just, they'd lost their characteristics due to the fire. And I think that resulted likely in a better overall project. And then you get into court, and for one, you get a better project, you are likely to get a better outcome. The courts find the collaborative voice credible, they find the county voice credible, and they pay attention to what folks had to say. Particularly on a project down on the Payette, it was very interesting, where an injunction was requested, and the judge really noted what the county commissioner had to say about the social and economic stability impacts of this project, and said one of the key factors in whether you issue an injunction is the public interest. And the judge said, I find that the collaborative process and furthering that is in the public interest. And that kind of win is really important. And we've seen also judges recognizing that collaborative groups that have participated in developing a project have an interest that's sufficient to intervene in a project, which is really important. Now, this is not to say everything is wine and roses. I think we've had a bit of a frustrating experience with East Reservoir, where we worked through and got very positive rulings out of Judge Christensen here in Missoula. Then it goes up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit, about a week before implementation was going to start, issued supposed to be a temporary injunction, but that was now about a year ago, and the Ninth Circuit held argument in February on an expedited basis, but still hasn't ruled. And I think that highlights, at least for policymakers, that collaboration isn't a panacea. It's not going to fix everything. And I think it highlights that protecting collaborative projects through legislation is still important. But on the other hand, in that case, we were able to stand up for collaboration as a process. A number of 29, in fact, groups that don't believe in collaboration submitted their own amicus brief saying, Judge, you shouldn't listen to the stakeholders because that's not appropriate. It's, the local interests shouldn't matter as much as national interests. And we stood up and said, no, this is really important. This is part of forest management from the Forest Service Organic Act on is place-based management. And the judge took the collaborative input into a lot of consideration. I think that was a successful result in standing up for collaboration. Another example is in working with the Pay at Forest Coalition. They got their first project that they put together got sued. It was a very demoralizing event to have that lawsuit filed. But then we won the lawsuit, at least in the district court. It's on appeal now. And that really revitalized folks. And the next project that came through wasn't sued on. And we had a really effective discussion. It was brokered by Idaho Conservation League, one of the big collaborative partners, with one objector, and resolved all the objections to that project. So I think you go from demoralization to success. So my final thought is just that litigation is going to be out there, but it's important for groups to stand up and make your voices heard in this part of the process, because it's the kind of the final step before you get to implementation, and it's important to stand up and make your voices heard. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Questions?
This is a specific question for the collaborative that I'm on, and is interested in your sort of reaction. Like I said, I'm a member of a new collaborative in Ravalli County. And the way we were put together, I'm still scratching my head a little bit about the whether there's anything to think about. In that the county commissioners put a call out for membership on a collaborative for the county, but not for the county. They just called out, anybody want to be on a collaborative group? There were 75 people that said, yeah, we're interested in resource issues in the county, particularly natural forest issues. And so there was a lot of interest. The county commissioners vetted the members, we all applied. They reviewed all the applications. We were all interviewed, and then the county commissioners basically picked 13 of us out of the 75. So the two of the county commissioners are members of our collaborative. They say they sit at the table as individual members, not as county commissioners. And we've had some discussion about that relative to that, what is our relationship to the county. And their sentiment is, well, better to have collaborative discussions early in the process and have us part of the discussion, but it's very clear that we're not a body of the county. So the question is, does that raise any particular legal red flags that we have two county commissioners who are members, in the fact that we were selected by the county commissioners?
Should probably clarify that Ravalli County had 5 commissioners, I believe. Yeah. Instead of 3.
Okay.
Everybody here in Ravalli County has 5 commissioners.
So if I'm going down to 3.
Going down to 3.
I think it would depend really on the bylaws of the collaborative and, you know, what kind of decision-making process you have among those 13, you know. And if that group were to get involved in a court process, I think it's just a discussion you'd want to have amongst yourself of what is our governance structure. At least for me, working with a collaborative group, it's important that they have an established governance structure so I know who to talk to be able to, because it's not very easy to talk with 13 people every time I need input. I need to have a steering team or something like that. So I think it's look at your internal governance structure and see how that works.
Any other comments of the panelists?
That's a great answer, that it depends, that's a good lawyer's answer, and that is the right one, I should say. I don't know the answer to this, I just raise, anytime you get county commissioners involved, there's always a question of whether you've got state public open meeting laws issues. I haven't been in Montana in a while, I forget what they are. If you had 3 commissioners on there, you'd have a problem for sure. With 2, I don't know, but I would flag it as something that could be looked at.
Megan, any comments? Non-legal comments? Advice? Sure, if you can state your name before you ask a question, that would help.
Hey, Matt, just to clarify on that, it's a matter of quorum.
Yeah,
And Ravalli County has 5
Hold on
commissioners.
just a second, please, just to make sure everybody can hear your question.
I just want to clarify,
we have a real live county commissioner here, who probably knows something about that.
well, not too much, but it has to do with quorum, as you know. Ravalli County has 5 commissioners. They're unique that way. And the only thing is, I mean, I guess if they go to 3, they would have to advertise, you know, at least 48 hours in advance on their, tell that they're going to be at that meeting. If they go down to 3, they can still attend. I mean, it's kind of a unique deal, but I don't think there's anything illegal or, I mean, John, you were in there for, is that? You're right. A safe answer? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a member of it, and I think, you know, I've had other commissioners show up, and, you know, we're not there conducting official county business, you know, making decisions on behalf of the county, so.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, I don't have to flag the issue, and I've heard comments in the past when I did do Montana open, public meeting kind of stuff, is that 2 commissioners discussing X in, some informal setting can sometimes lead to issues there, but if it's not official business, you're probably right.
I'll maybe add, and when you have government officials involved, I think this is true not only in Montana, but other states. I've had particular experience with this in Washington with the Public Meetings Act, that if you run afoul of things like that, it's an easy way for project opponents to trip you up. It's much easier if you have a clear public meetings violation for someone to go after that than to research a NEPA case.
Okay, next question. Nope. I'll just shout. Bill Meadows from Trout Creek. I'm just a dumb farmer that lives downstream, downwind, and downhill from a hazardous fuels reduction project that was held up 2 years in the court system. And since I was involved from the start, I kind of kept up to date on it. It was quite interesting to see, read all the arguments for and against. Then I read in the papers now that the various agencies, when there's objection to repeal, that they're breaking the law. Well, based on my ignorance of the court system, breaking the law to me is a crime. So if it's a crime, what I propose is to change the entire system and have a trial by jury so we can get the facts presented, witnesses, and have a chance to cross-examine either side of the arguments that are taking place. Because what I saw in some of these arguments, it wasn't facts, it was passion. I have a problem with that. When I'm at risk, on some of these projects if they're not done. So I guess my question to the panel is, could something like this be done? It'd have to be done from the legislative standpoint, and there'd be a cost, different costs associated with it, but pros and cons of this, changing the system.
Well, the short answer is that would be a radical change in how environmental law, public lands law is done now, because now it is done as a matter of administrative law and, on the record and not done throughout that kind of fact-finding process. But I guess the more to the point answer is my personal opinion. If you want facts and not passion to rule, then a jury is the last place you want to go. And I'll say that with some experience, and maybe you concur, I don't know. But I mean, the way environmental law is done in front of a judge on the record, the ultimate standard is this decision arbitrary or capricious? And you have a judge, a trained judge looking at that based on a record and making that decision. And that's a much, if you don't like his decision, he's got to write down all the reasons he made it, okay, and publish them and hand them to you. And you can see why he did it, and you can pick them apart. If you don't like them, you can appeal. That's a highly rational process. If you get a jury, you pick 12 people off the street, talk to them for a few minutes, pick 12 out of a big pool, and you make a bunch of arguments to them, and you don't know why they decided what they did. They just, you win or you lose, and that's it. So I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not sure it's the right remedy.
Other comments?
My other add to that is I agree with what you said, that these are pretty difficult questions to put in front of a jury. The other issue is just time and cost. One of the concerns about litigation is delay and how long it takes and how much it costs. And dealing with juries and preparing things for a jury trial, that ups the cost, that ups the delay. Particularly in civil cases, in many areas, civil trials are getting rarer and rarer because courts have to, under the Speedy Trial Act, give a jury trial to a criminal defendant who wants one within a certain amount of days. And they prioritize criminal matters, particularly in jury trials. So that leads to, if you file a contract lawsuit in a number of jurisdictions, getting to a jury trial can take forever. And I would be concerned about having increased delay in our litigation process.
I was told to yell. I think my question to you guys is, a few years ago, we were hearing worry from the Forest Service, from agency on whether collaborative groups were FACAs. I can say that our collaborative group just decided not to worry about it once we understood we weren't one. Just proceed. And I wondered if that had come up in any of your court experiences, the FACA argument versus the grassroots collaborative that springs up somehow. Thank you.
So I'll take the easy first part, and then you guys can talk about the legal stuff. But in my experience, collaboratives get formed in a number of different ways, and all of the collaboratives that I've been engaged in were developed by, non-government people, whether private citizens, people involved with, timber groups, environmental groups, etc. And so that kind of organic development of a collaborative working with the Forest Service or the BLM, that's totally fine and outside the realm of FACA. When you start to have the Forest Service convening, that's when you move more into falling under FACA and needing to hold meetings in that regard. So if the Forest Service is the one that is calling for a collaborative, like for example, in the first question about the Ravalli County Commissioners kind of having this process for developing a collaborative, if that had been the Forest Service, totally a FACA. But if it's a group of people coming together and then working with the Forest Service can have a seat at the table, voting or not or whatever, but as long as it's not convened by a federal agency, then FACA doesn't apply.
I think that's right.
FACA stands for Federal Advisory Committee Act. So does anyone want to say what that means?
No. It's a federal law, basically requiring some process and procedure if you qualify as a formal advisory committee. There's been litigation about it in the past. Sometimes, it hasn't always been clear exactly what is and is not an advisory committee. But I think what Megan has said is, at least my understanding of FACA law at the present, and I have not been involved directly in a FACA challenge either, but I think that's right.
Yeah, I don't think it's come up.
I would just say, are you going to comment, Lawson, on that?
Just briefly, I don't have much to add. I think that's Megan's description of it was really accurate, and I haven't seen any issues arise. I have seen issues arise where a forest kind of starts handpicking people that they want to meet with and convene, and that's exactly what Megan was talking about who's convening and how it's working makes a big difference.
The FACA law is federal, obviously, and if you are designated as a federal advisory committee, that has to do with the process of appointments. There are a whole series of monitoring requirements, note-taking, et cetera. Julie and I served on a FACA committee. You don't want to do it.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that your grassroots, you're not doing it at the direction of a federal agency. And if you have federal participation, you can be safer if you have it, if you're participating as advisory members, informal members, as opposed to a leadership position. Lady?
My question is, does federal land have a legal obligation to the local community? And if so,
Speak about
does
you talk to your husband, you told me.
does federal land have an obligation to the a legal obligation to the local community? And if so, what is it? Everybody hear me?
Well, in a typical lawyer fashion, I will say it depends. And what it depends is what type of land and how it's governed. And then the obligations to the local community flow from that. General Forest Service land is governed by kind of an overlapping series of statutes, starting with the Organic Act, Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act, and NIFMA, ESA. There are other types of lands that have much more specific mandates there's a whole swath of lands in Oregon that have a specific timber mandate. But the Forest Service lands, there's a 25% receipts provision that goes to counties. There's some direction to the Forest Service to establish offices in areas that need development. There's a lot of recognition of the role of the Forest Service as kind of a rural development engine in the law. But I think it really depends on what part of the forest you're talking about and what laws apply there. And certainly, and then if you get into BLM land or something else, it's a little different animal.
Nothing to add. I think that's right.
Question here.
So Montana Public Radio is doing a series this week on federal forest management, and yesterday they interviewed someone that I'll call one of the serial litigants, and he said, the only reason that we're litigating is to get the agency to follow the law. So a question I've always wanted to pose to lawyers is it possible to write an unassailable EA or an unassailable EIS, and if no, why not?
I don't think so. one of the great things about doing what I do water rights now. I moved out of state and I can kind of say whatever I want anymore. And I used to do a lot of this kind of litigation and I don't much anymore. And I will say that, as I alluded to in my remarks, if you do enough of this litigation, you start to get really good at picking out isolated comments and turning it against people, for example. You get to hear a lot of folks, in various levels of government saying, hey, we've got this paralysis, no matter what I write, you guys are gonna find a way to challenge it, analysis paralysis. And after a while, you start thinking, you're not wrong about that. You can look at that cold record and usually find, in my experience, I've pulled a few rabbits out of hats where people thought they had an ironclad decision and we were able to challenge it. Now, again, I want to be really clear, a lot of bad decisions get made out there, and this is not always a bad thing, but I really do think it's important to have more discussion, more case law on what is an adequate analysis, and what does a proper ESA analysis look like? And like I said, Coal Summit and the links issue was a great example of that. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. But it's a kind of a cynical answer. I think it's really hard to write a bomb-proof EA. I've seen ones out there that are pretty hard to challenge, but I think it's a fair question to ask.
Lawson, do you have a further comment on that issue?
Well, I'll let Megan go. You go ahead first.
Yes, so my response would be, no, there's no such thing as bulletproof NEPA, but I also think that there is a cultural dynamic within the agency. I think about, I was actually just meeting with Chief Took and Chris French, who's now a Deputy Associate Chief. You guys have big, long titles, it's hard to keep track, but they've been doing a ton of research into how they do environmental analysis nationwide and comparing that to other agencies, federal agencies that are required to do NEPA. And basically the Forest Service is wildly out of step. And so, I like to think about how it used to be that most projects were EISs, and they were still a lot longer than, say, Department of Defense doing an EIS. But then there was this move, many years ago toward more EAs. And it seems like what we've seen is that EAs have kind of turned into EISs. I mean, there might not be the number of alternatives, the same number analyzed, but in terms of the depth of analysis. And so, that's an example of, that wasn't court mandated, that didn't come from legislation. I mean, if anything, it's kind of against the heart of what the intent of an EA is. And so I think that it's important to note that the agency is taking a really hard look at that right now, and very strongly committed to rethinking the way that they might be conducting their environmental analyses from the administrative side, including potentially opening up the NEPA regulations and rewriting them. So I think that could have a lot of promise, and it comes from the people who are closest to this environmental analysis issue, which is the people that work at the agency.
Yeah, I think Matt and Megan have been spot on that there is no such thing as a perfect NEPA document, and I say that if you can't find a NEPA violation in a document, usually you're not trying hard enough. It's difficult because it's essentially a rule of reason. Did the agency perform a reasonably thorough analysis? And so there's always an opportunity. And I think the idea that the lawsuits are, at least for most of these projects, that they're about the law as opposed to a policy dispute. I mean, I think it's a bit of a dodge to say it's about following the law. It's more, we want you to do different things, and that's perfectly fine. I think people have different views on policy, and the law is a tool to enforce that. I think also though where we have gotten, and Megan was talking about this with the growth of the documentation is really getting away from what NEPA was designed to do and how it benefits the process. They say things like, or the CEQ said, NEPA is about excellent decisions, not excellent paperwork. And I think we're leaning in the direction of excellent paperwork too much these days. And it's important to recognize that if a 300-page EA is really hard to digest. It's really hard to find out what the key issues are and what that actually means. And so these enormous documents are actually, I think, obscuring the issues that are important and making for less effective and less informative processes. And I think I'm really heartened to see that the Forest Service leadership is taking a new look at that, because I think if you have tighter, more readable documents, then you can get the type of public engagement that NEPA was designed to facilitate, and you can get those excellent results.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask that exact same question, so that's pretty interesting. So I'll just add a couple of things related to this topic, which I did some looking into our litigation record recently. And so since 2013, 34 of 1,029 decisions have been litigated. 19 of those 34 cases had the plaintiffs of the same two groups. And the interesting point to me was that the projects with the most analysis, those on which we do a full-blown environmental impact statement, were the most litigated. So 40% of the records of decisions since 2013 were challenged in lawsuits. So even though our overall litigation rate is not as high, and that comes out a lot when the frequent litigants want to say that they're not really a problem, the record of litigation for records of decision is very high. In Montana, that is closer to 45%. And often when, even if we lose on a point and are forced to go back, we ultimately do end up implementing these projects. So the main result is additional analysis on our most analyzed projects. So I don't want to grandstand, so I'm done, but thanks.
I don't think we should overlook projects. The standard of, okay, John Gatchell, Montana Wilderness Association. We've intervened in numerous, on the Lolo Forest Plan, in support of the Beaverhead Deer Lodge, and recently in the Kootenai, in support of its forest plan. Not because its plans were perfect or bulletproof, but they were, on the whole, moving the national forest in a positive direction. Those were litigated by motorized users, large collections, and they lost. And they raised all the arguments that they wished to make. They wanted a different decision. So I don't think we should overlook the fact that the Forest Service doesn't always lose in court, that in fact the standard is not whether it's bulletproof, but whether it will prevail in court. And as we're collaborating, that's an important thing, as we start to engage in large place-based collaborations, for example, the Whitefish Range Partnership, hoping to influence the Flathead Plan. That plan will probably be litigated. And so I think we as collaborators also want to think through how to make sure that we can help. And the reason that the Montana Wilderness Association intervenes, to be quite clear, is because we can bring great legal help. And we decide who represents us, and the Forest Service doesn't always have that choice. And we can make a difference, and we have made a difference in supporting good decisions.
We have about 10 minutes left.
This kind of follows up on John's comment. Robin King, Yakima Forest Council, Kootenai Forest State Forest Coalition, pain in everybody's, what sometimes. So one of the things that, the Western Governors Association had a panel discussion on alternate dispute resolution that I sat down on and listened to. And the representative from the Western Environmental
Lawson.
Yes, thank you. Made a great point. Instead of always trying to figure out how to stay out of court, I'm paraphrasing, let's use the judiciary to our advantage. And that really great interest to me, and I just want to know if y'all have a comment about that. How we could, instead of always trying to run away from it, how do we use these, this great institution that we have that's part of our democracy to our best advantage? Does that make sense?
I think it does, and I probably should let you answer because I'm a little out of my league here. I don't practice regularly in this area anymore. I would say in general that the thing you hear a lot about courts is they're not a terribly efficient way to make decisions. And so the fact that, if you're in a situation where the best resource you've got going with you to help you figure out the right thing to do is that, is the federal courts, probably something's pretty broken along the way. And that may be, that he may have a point. I mean, I made my earlier flippant comment about, there being no bulletproof EIAs. I think that's probably true, but I think John's point is really important. That doesn't mean there are not better and worse environmental documents out there. And the reason it's hard is because the underlying laws have so many conflicting mandates in them. And that's what, it's so hard to do an analysis that pays proper respect to all those things. And so I do think the standard should not be as a bomb-proof, as a bulletproof, but how good a decision is it? Probably it will end up in court. I'm not convinced. I don't do this anymore. It was not a satisfying area of law for me. I'm not convinced there's not a better way to make those decisions ultimately, but it's hard because there's a lot of conflicting mandates and a lot of different constituencies.
I would add that it's important not to be afraid that a project will be litigated or trying too hard to avoid litigation. Then you end up with really long EISs that get litigated anyway. And so that litigation will come often regardless of what the agency and groups do. As far as alternative dispute resolution, yeah, I think that there are a lot of good ideas out there to explore about ways to make decisions more efficient, to get a kind of a neutral decision maker to look at a project or claims about it. There's also, by collaborative groups getting involved in litigation, that's one way to use the system to your advantage. Then you get some nice precedent in there, and you get a good Ninth Circuit decision, and you can use that on a number of district court decisions moving forward. I mean, that's a lot of the strategy of some of the groups that litigate from the plaintiff's side. So, but I don't want to discount different types of dispute resolution too much, because I think there are interesting ideas about ways to get things done quicker, or there are different structures or statutes as well that apply to different types of management. One thing is the Magnuson Act, which is a fisheries act that I did some work with when I was at the Justice Department, has a council decision-making process and then a very short litigation timetable. And that, some sort of model like that, streamlining litigation of collaborative projects, either through ADR or through the courts, I think would make a big difference in these litigation delays that we've been seeing.
Thank you, Ruth. About 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm George Korn. I was a Valley County attorney for 20 years. I just finished up on a study commission for Valley County. We're going down to 3 county commissioners. And so I think, Margaret, your question is going to be answered. There'll be 1 county commissioner at that meeting, would be my guest, to comply with the Montana Open Meetings Law. But I just want to emphasize a couple of things that the panel has said. One of the things I think is real critical for local involvement, we had a lawsuit in 2006, a little background. 2000 in Valley County, we're 350,000 acres in the fire of 2000 in our county. Some of that was on the Sewell State Forest. We had the first lawsuit on it would be the first Healthy Forest Restoration Act that was done in Montana. We had a lawsuit on that. It was a fuel reduction product or process that the Forest Service had gone. It was in the Middle East Fork of the Bitterroot. The Forest Service asked us to intervene. Dave Bull, was the Forest Service supervisor at that time. county got involved, we had the Sewell Fire Department involved, we had the Resource Conservation Association involved, all these people, because we've gone through this collaborative process, the forerunner of the collaborative process. It wasn't called that. Neighborhoods had met, we had broken up the county into districts, people had discussed about how necessary it was to have the hazardous fuel reduction process go forward, and then the Forest Service would be able to go through with the Denning project. This was the first one. There was a lawsuit involved. What could the county do? Well, I urged the county commissioners to get involved. It didn't take much urging. But then, this is the big takeaway. We got the second big takeaway. The first was the involvement from all the local councils. The second was, who funds this? County Attorney's Office in Montana don't have expertise in federal court. I can certainly prepare a witness, but that's usually in a homicide trial, or it's usually in a subdivision case. We're not familiar with federal law. In this particular case, the Montana Wood Products Association and other groups came in and helped fund this. Julie Altimus, is she here? Julie, how are you? I don't think I've seen you since that day we walked out of federal court. It's great to see you here. Judy was one of the main funders on that. And we were able to intervene, and we gave a local touch with that, and I worked with a wonderful attorney, Julie Weese from Portland, which Lawson has worked with her on several suits. The local touch, we prepared all the local witnesses. I gave the opening statement in front of Judge Malloy. Julie did the real heavy lifting and the work on the federal part of the suit to make the decision stand up. And the Forest Service group flew in an A-team from their Denver office, who normally argues appellate arguments for Judge Malloy, and that decision was able to stand up. But without the payment, I think it ended up $70,000 or $80,000, I think was the legal cost, which a county couldn't bear. Patrick was interesting yesterday when he said DNRC now has a process that the state might help fund those things. Hopefully with collaboration, we'll work this out so you won't have any problems with this. People will be satisfied they won't want to go to court. But if you do, you need that local touch, but you need to make sure you have a way to fund that litigation so the collaborative process can stand up. But there's nothing more defeating to that is when you've gone ahead, you put all this work into it, you've involved your community, and then you get a thumbs down decision. Thank you.
Thank you. What's your question back here?
Dave Atkins, Global Restoration Committee. I want to follow up on the alternative disputes resolution versus litigation. I'd like you to explain that a little bit more on how each of those work and what the differences are in terms of the results at the end, and particularly with the CEQ quote of the goal is to have excellent decisions, and comparing that with the results that we get a lot of process wins that don't end up changing anything on the ground. So I want to have that comparison of those litigation versus alternative disputes, and whether that would speed up the process, change the cost, and get to excellent decisions as opposed to legal wins over process.
Sure. I think the basic alternative dispute resolution mechanism that's been talked about is arbitration. And how arbitration works is you have a panel or a single arbitrator who's appointed usually by consent of the parties. And to do that with forest management, there would be a statutory structure, and I expect the arbitrator would be a retired judge or something on those lines. And it's kind of more of a private process than court. Court is very public and open, and then arbitrators can usually issue decisions more rapidly than courts can. I think that's the main attraction of trying out some arbitration, is that you get to a decision quicker, and then if something needs to be fixed, then you can get right to it. The courts have a lot of backlog. I think there are a lot of vacancies in the courts, and they have the obligation to prioritize criminal matters. So it's things can take quite a while, and it's unpredictable how long litigation will take. So I think there's a lot being talked about, maybe trying some arbitration on projects, seeing how that works. I don't think we know if it would have the benefits, but I think there's a lot of potential there, at least to look at it.
For a short time, if we could have one question here, then one after.
Thank you. Maureen Connor, Beaverhead Deer Lodge Working Group. My question is, fire salvage, I believe, is about to become a sort of a big thing here for some of our collaboratives in Montana. And I wondered if you had any advice on how collaboratives can help the agency with these projects in an effective and robust manner.
I'll start first. Get involved early and help the agency design the project. I think that's one thing that you can really do. I think salvage is one of those areas that's a little more contentious, and there's a smaller zone of agreement. And the earlier you get in, the more likely it is you can develop a project that fits those parameters. Or at least, you may not be able to get all the way there to kind of a collaborative endorsement, but you can help shape the project in productive ways. And then an injunction on salvage is often the whole ballgame, and so because of wood deterioration. So I think that collaborative involvement is really, really important, and thinking about what kind of restoration efforts could the forest do with the receipts. I think that's an important thing to look at. Should there be an emergency situation determination? Because the objection process, particularly when you get a boilerplate 250-point objection, doesn't add a whole lot substantively, but it can take 3 more months, and that's pretty valuable time. So getting involved early, thinking about ESD, and recognizing you may not get all the way there to a consensus support, but you can provide input that helps shape the project in a productive way. And fortunately, at least a couple recent projects that I worked with on Idaho that have been salvage projects that conservation groups were able to get behind. I think the drivers for that were careful design of the project, and they identified important forest restoration needs that could be funded by the timber receipts. And I think that's a way to think kind of outside the box and find a win for everybody. Because I don't think anybody benefits if you have things like we have on the Pioneer Fire, where the high severity patches are so large that there won't be natural regeneration for centuries, perhaps. And so you need to get in and clear out some of the burned wood and do some replanting. So I think looking at the landscape will be helpful there.
Any other comments? Maybe.
Yeah, I would just say that I think it's important to be really honest up front about what the goal of the post-fire logging project is. There are obviously economic benefits. The ecological benefits are a lot more questionable. And so if your collaborative is, depending on what your charter is and what you guys have agreed your goals are, it might be okay to take a pass on engaging with a post-fire logging project as a collaborative. The Forest Service can do projects outside of the collaborative groups that they work with. And I think in terms of keeping it keeping the contention out of it as much as possible, focusing treatment along roads where they do pose a hazard to vehicles traveling, especially roads that are open for public access. So kind of thinking narrowly about what is needed from a salvage perspective is probably helpful.
Matt, any comments? I have one question. It's referred to in your notes, several of you. There are remedies being proposed before Congress to change the rules of the legal game in relation to litigation. Some of them are seen by some interested in the collaborative processes as damaging to the collaboratives. Whereas if you change the rules in a certain way, you may damage the collaborative process. You guys have any comments about that? And how good your communication is with the congressional delegation?
Yeah, so that's what I work on most these days, is what Congress is up to. There are basically two main avenues in which Congress is trying to address forest management, and one is through the way that forest fires are funded. You guys may be familiar with things like, we talk about a fire funding fix, and the Forest Service spends over half their budget on fighting fire. And then at the end of the year, they spend even more. They have to borrow money to do it. And so there are different ideas in Congress about how to solve that. The one that is, I believe, the most bipartisan legislation in Congress right now is the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act, and it exists both in the Senate and there's a companion bill in the House, and that's something that everyone can agree on, everyone does agree on, and so from my perspective, we should just move forward and pass that, because as you all know, working in collaborative, let's focus on the areas we agree. The other pieces to that, and there are kind of several bills that focus more on forest management reform, and so they would change the laws that govern how forests are managed. There was one by Representative Westerman out of Arkansas that passed the House just last week, and then there are a slurry of bills that are similar to that to varying degrees in the Senate. And what I would say in terms of the impact of those on collaboratives is that I think that collaboration is making a lot of progress, and now working in Washington and Oregon and California and nationwide, I see that true across the West, and I don't see the rest of the country bogged down in litigation to the same extent that Montana is. And one of my concerns about going too far in the way of forest management reform as a legislative tool is that it upsets the apple cart, and a lot of the incentives that people have to come to the table as a collaborative group, that those go away, and that people then retreat back to their corners and start throwing flames at each other. So I know that there are some of the proposals that are out there do offer, for example, categorical exclusions for a collaborative, but then it gets really tricky about, well, what is or isn't a collaborative. So there's a lot of, the devil's in the details, right? And so I think that we can and should have a conversation about how our forests are managed, and maybe there are some changes that might be appropriate. But I think that tying this fire funding issue that is totally bipartisan to a forest management reform issue that is much more partisan and that's a lot more controversial, it just doesn't make sense. It seems that we should move forward with what we know, what we all agree is the right thing to do, and then let's have a really in-depth conversation about what is the right thing to do on the forest management realm.
Any other comments on the panel on the question?
Sure. Yeah, I think the devil is in the details. That there are a lot of good ideas out there, and maybe some that are not so good, depending on your perspective. There are a lot of ideas on how to address fire funding. WIDFA is one of those. There's we've seen a proposal from Senator Murkowski in the past. There's the Westerman bill that was mentioned has its own mechanism. And I do think we all agree that that issue needs to be fixed, at least from an accounting perspective. We haven't figured out, everyone hasn't figured out how. And as far as, impacts on the collaborative process, I don't foresee Congress passing something that is going to be wholesale changes to the legal environment. I expect that what gets done will be, some measures, but I don't think we're going to get to a place where the apple cart is tossed over. I do think that coupling some forest management reforms is important because the concern is if you're not streamlining some of the paperwork or the management or those issues, that you may just end up just having to come back and ask for more money, which is difficult in this budgetary environment. Yeah, but there are a lot of ideas out there, and I think there's fortunately a lot of bipartisan space on forest management, which is nice because that's not the case with a lot of issues these days, and I think it's important just for people to talk and try and figure out the best way to move forward.
Thank you, and thanks for listening to Charlie. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, that was fun.
How can traditional internal operations change to be more receptive to collaborative? That might be what we just talked about, the length of the department balance. And the next one is similar in that it asks, what are the agencies doing in their selection and placement of staff so that they can be more receptive to collaborative processes? Joe and Christine, I don't know if you want to try to answer either one of these.
Yeah, my first response to that is I think we need to really have leaders at the top of our agencies that support collaboration. And I think we're getting that, and we have that. Certainly Luann, and I think we're going to be chief. Certainly we're a little bit more in flux with the BLMs in the Forest Service right now. We don't know where the new director is going to be, but just having that leadership at the top is going to be important. And then nurturing, training sessions at the field level for engaging with the public. As I mentioned, we don't have a lot of that. A lot of us are not trained in that. I think we need to have our leadership support training of being involved with that, and then just support carving out time for people like me who are working in the field to attend some of the collaborative groups and be able to engage with them. And that's kind of one of the best parts of my job, and the reason I'm still working at it. So.
I'll just add a couple things from the Forest Service perspective. I think we've been working on over the last several years a couple things. There's a training called Leaders as Conveners in the Forest Service that has been put on in multiple places around the country. Some of the folks in here might have participated in that, but it's about getting our line officers and leadership on the units more skilled and able to work more effectively with collaboratives. And so that's something we put a National Collaboration Cadre that's also available to support and has been doing trainings around the country as well. And then a lot of regions, Megan Oswald introduced herself earlier, I guess yesterday morning, and she's our regional collaboration coordinator. A lot of regions are starting to hire positions like Megan's to help us build up skills, develop trainings, and so we can be more effective engaging with collaboratives. And then along the process side, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the issues around environmental analysis and decision making and trying to be more efficient. We're also, looking at our existing internal policies around things that add process and burden but don't add any conservation value or any value to our partners, to try to streamline some of those things and make us more efficient in our work. So.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. And I was just really pleased with the last panel and the depth of information that was brought forward. And it makes me realize how much more there is for the network to do. But as we close and enter near the end of our session, I want to bring up something that we did accomplish over the last year based on our first annual meeting in Helena. if you do recall. We had a series of small groups that got together and identified, well, how can the network serve the needs of the individual collaborative groups? And the strongest message that came out was via communication, both the internal and external communication. And so there's two things that we embarked on over the last year. And I want to talk about one of them, and that's this set of short descriptions, which we call the dashboard. Now, if you still have your little folder in front of you, in the back of the folder are a series of like 1 or 2 page little descriptions. And you know, Megan Oswalt was just mentioned by Christine, and I want to thank her and Tim Love and the advisory committee for supporting me and others to try to be able to provide for all the collaborative groups some real simple references, both in terms of collaborative's internal operations and in terms of how you can work with agencies. And we've just gotten started. And what I want to do more than anything else is to ask you to reflect on the kinds of pieces of information that would be most helpful to your group. And we start out with 9 of these. And before we got too deep, we wanted to have this meeting to get some feedback from our participants as to what other kinds of information would be useful. So if you'll note, in your packet, these first 9 are reproduced, and they're on our webpage, which is the second thing that we've produced to support communications, and I'll let Deb go through that in just a moment. But first of all, back to the dashboard. So each dashboard has an instrument, you know, like when you look on your panel of your car, you know, there's a speedometer, or there's a, you know, fuel gauge or something. And so we started out with some things that many of you have already gone well down this road and you don't need. But maybe there's someone new to the group or some new collaborative that's forming. So some basic information about collaborative functions are the purpose of one part of this dashboard. So here's how to create a charter. And then there's on meeting facilitation, how you might move forward there. On record keeping in collaborative groups. On little rules of thumb for making decisions. Now you'll notice that there's a disclaimer on all of these, that these are not official policy of the network or of the agencies or the state or anyone else. These are just boiled down into something easy to read, rules of thumb that can be helpful for your groups. And by the way, on the webpage there are links to much more in-depth references about all of these topics. But what we found when we started to think about this communication was, boy, you really have to be dedicated to read through this stuff. Especially some of the stuff in the Federal Register that, you know, takes a while. So we decided to try to deal with some of those things, and not only some best management practices, if you will, for running your collaborative, but also some things that are frequently asked questions about, well, how do collaboratives interact with agencies? So here's a little dashboard instrument on the role of collaborative groups in national forest management. We want to produce one of these for the BLM as well, and for the DNRC. The levels of environmental review, which we just talked about. What are these things that are decision memos and records of decision, and how are they related to environmental documentation? Here's some little ideas about engaging with the Forest Service prior to NEPA. We heard many panelists say, you know, get in there early. Well, here's how you can contact Forest Service people. And then here's a little instrument on categorical exclusions. What are those and why? And even a special case of the Farm Bill categorical exclusions. So these dashboard instruments are just a beginning. And what I'd like to ask you is, if you think these are A, appropriate, let us know, and we'll continue to try to produce some. And B, if there's some topics that you really want to have, let us know that as well. I mean, I can think of many off the top of my head and would like to work on some more with describing the Good Neighbor Authority, for example, talking about stewardship contracting. And, you know, our idea was to keep it simple, something one page someone could read and get a basic idea about what this is, and then being able to go to our webpage and finding out more information. Let me just ask you for not a thumbs up, thumbs down, but, you know, maybe brief nodding of heads. Do you think this is a good idea? should we be producing and continuing to invest in these dashboard instruments?
Yes.
Good idea? Great, great. Thank you. Scott?
Two suggestions. I'd love to see the last panel content kind of distilled down into a new one of
Ooh,
these.
excellent. Yeah, yeah.
And then it might be good if there are people in the network who have particular expertise where you could add, to learn more, contact.
Oh, great.
Jim Birchfield, who knows about.
Good
X,
suggestion.
Just so it's a little more.
Yeah.
Connects people with it.
I'm going to write that down, Scott.
Scott, are you talking about advisory council or just in general, like Jim Birchfield?
No, there's like expertise, like,
People in the network
That's what I mean, yeah.
who know stuff. Brian Kahn's an attorney who will donate his time to help. Thank you very much, Scott.
no, that's a wonderful suggestion. Any other ideas? It sounds like we should go forward. Is that right? I've got that right. But make some modifications, ways for people to respond to these things and add to them and find that local expertise. That's great. Thank you, Scott. Okay, now Deb, I want to allow you to scroll around a little bit and maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the buttons, and I'll give you the microphone so you can help people navigate the web page.
Okay, so this is the webpage where on the dashboard issues are. Here's the home. It's not showing exactly everything. But, all right, so there it is. This is our home page. There's the tabs. You guys have any suggestions?
Why don't you click on participating groups?
Okay. All right, so this is the map. Who we all are. It has listing at each one. Like you click on it, it goes to each website. For example, this goes right to their website, which is good. Has everybody there. It's just been like the Ravalli County Collaborative doesn't have a webpage yet. So it'll take you right to, pardon me?
They did have a commissioner on there.
So if they don't have a webpage, and I have it go right to their email. So that's the participating groups in the map. Where else should we go?
How about where the dashboard's located?
Yeah, the dashboard's under quick reference guides because there's other things there. Like dashboards is first, right? And it takes you to each one, all of them. And then you just click on, one of them, and it'll take you to the dock.
Is there a printed block and everything?
Yep. You then send it to someone, it's in the Google Docs stuff, so.
Okay.
And where else should we go?
Well, I don't know if we need to go too far. I'm just suggesting that Deb is our master of the web and the person who posts things. She's also on Facebook and, keeps that kind of electronic communication going on. So if you have any ideas on things you'd like to see on the web page, even design ideas or, suggestions like Scott had about resources, please get in touch with Deb. She's someone who's just been extraordinarily effective at getting our information out there. Yes?
What about our organizations linking them to travel through this? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. In fact, that's one of the things we had discussed is asking your organizations to maybe either link to our page and or the Facebook page.
Now, some of the groups are already on here, right? They're web pages.
Oh, all of them are.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
No, they're not.
Well, not all of them, but yeah, Pat, you want to send your link and, yeah, if you guys, any of your organizations want to be somehow referenced, just let me know. Peter has a question.
Oh, Peter.
So a lot of these things, these are great tools, wonderful stuff, but some of these things are living documents. So is there a mechanism through which people with all their expertise communities and provide feedback or comments. So, any of these topics, creating a charter for collaborative. Someone might read through this and go, well, here's something that's worked really for us. So maybe having a discussion board underneath that or something where people could,
Yeah.
then that way you keep it as a living document with added information.
Excellent idea, Peter. I like that. Is that hard to set up, Deb?
It's a lot of work because you're going to have to edit all the other stuff that comes in, but.
Sure.
We do have our, the guy, our web guru who does the things I can't do.
Sure.
You just ask him how to set up some sort of comment thing or.
I think we do have to be careful about comments. I think there has to be some filtering. We just can't accept, any comment that comes in. But with that level of filtering, I like the idea of being able to have that exchange of good practices.
Do you think it should be only on these documents?
We can work on that, Deb, as the best way it might fit. Other comments on this communication device? How about a round of applause for Deb for getting this set up and making sure
Working with such great groups, and I really appreciate the volunteerism that goes on because I've done it for many years myself, so it's a good thing.
Thanks, Deb. Hey, we've come to the close of our meeting. I'm grateful for all the participation and thought that's gone into this workshop. Thank you for coming, and I want to turn it back over to our chair, Gordy Sanders, for some closing comments.
Thanks, Jim, and thank all of you for coming. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation the last day and a half, and lots of different insights that have been provided. And I think our coordinator, Tim Love, has been taking great notes. So I'm not sure, we're going to produce something, as a result of this conference. But it's interesting to see all of you again, and as we go forward, I think there's, we had a fair amount of conversation about collaboratives, and if there's, doesn't that work? Is that better? You want me to start over? Okay. There's been a number of conversations about collaborative brick and mortar collaboratives, and then we've had conversations about collaborative processes. And I think as we go forward, I think part of the challenge for individual collaboratives may be also, how do you participate in a collaborative process? So it wouldn't have to be a project, say it's a salvage project, whatever, you wouldn't have to participate as a collaborative per se, but actually help convene some gathering of folks for a collaborative process. I think there's great potential in that. And I think we heard earlier today, synergy. And it is incredible what collaboratives bring to the table. I know in the Cold Summit decision, Don Malloy, actually, he referenced the fact that there were amicus briefs filed by so many different individuals and organizations. And I think that was the first time ever nationally that had occurred. And great thanks to the Wilderness Society who actually took the lead in making that happen. So I won't stand up here and yak very long. I think all of you have contributed greatly. The idea for our workshops is to make sure they're interactive, make sure they're fairly informal, so folks have a chance to contribute, build on what we've been working on. And Peter's comments, I think, will be very helpful. I think that goes for basically anything. If you see an opportunity to help us improve how we're moving forward, what we're working on, I think we've got a challenge working with, as Christine talked about, their new streamlined NEPA authorities, and all of us complain about how long it takes to get a project done, right? It is the single common thread. The other one is we all want to see more work done on the ground. So if there's an opportunity to streamline that process, I think we have a very key role in helping move that forward. And I want to, before I forget, I want to remind everybody, we're going to have this joint meeting between the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership and MFCN in Coeur d'Alene in March 20th to 22nd in the spring. And Chief Took has already been invited to attend that meeting, and we'll bring in lots of different folks, as well as Governor Bullock and the Governor of Idaho, and so we'll see how that unfolds. So one thing that came up, and not too much, but go tell your story. I mean, we've all heard that before, and we're not very good at it. I'm terrible at it. But I like the challenge of this Facebook high school kid, anything that involves Facebook. I don't do it, I'm not going to do it, never going to do it. Come here with me. Come on, all you old people. As it is the future of communication, like it or not, that's just the way it is. So we have to embrace it, figure out how to make it work, and provide new information, regular information, to keep folks in the loop. So with that, any final comments, thoughts?
I just want to say to that Facebook thing, I was shocked because I've been boycotting Facebook personally, just because. And that's where I'm getting most of the traffic, is on Facebook. I was amazed. I told the advisory council this. Yeah, I mean, and they have this thing where you boost it, you know, to multiply it. It's amazing how many people are responding to that.
I think, didn't I hear that the week of October 22nd, when she boosted it, it was over 1,000 hits.
And people respond and like, and just today, I think, just now, I'm getting notifications. People I've never heard of, and who knows where they're from, right? They like us. So your organizations that do the Facebook like us, because I can't make you like this. I mean, this sounds crazy, right? But that's the way it works, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, for all of you, you know, we did hear some legal kind of direction. You cannot make a NEPA document bulletproof. That's just the way it is. So, I mean, all of us need to go forward with that and not be afraid of going to court. And I think that's true. The agency is working very hard to kind of streamline what they're doing. No more 500, 600, 800 page documents, because nobody reads them anyway, other than those who want to take it to court. The more words you write, the greater the opportunity to get tripped up. Right, Chip? Okay. Anything else for the good of the order, Bill? Glad you made it for a little bit. It's great. All right, so we will have, we're going to have the meeting in the spring, joint meeting. We will also have an annual meeting next fall this time. It's in our charter. We're going to meet once a year, so we will do that. Anything else? Tim?
We'll be sending out a post-survey, post-workshop.
Okay. Everybody hear that? Post-workshop survey. Make sure you provide your comments. Anything we could have done better, didn't like, didn't work. Anyway, appreciate all of you. Have a safe trip home. Ed?
So the video proceedings will be posted on the website?
They will, yes.
The MCAT people here, they've been doing 4 hours of workshop, so we'll get, I don't know how it gets downloaded to us, but we'll have that.
Deb will get it figured out on how to get it on their website, whatever they have recorded.
Probably Facebook.
And Facebook, whatever works. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Well, thank you all. Appreciate everybody coming. It was very helpful. Thank you.